Hey everybody, it's Bill with CKCB. I'm just here doing a special episode for you. This is an episode of History Goon. I'm sure most of you have realized that Kevin History Goon Carlton is the new co-host for the show. But maybe none of you have checked out his show History Goon. Maybe you have, but either way, this is one of his episodes, and he's going to do the same thing on his show with the Ashley Gang episode. So here we go, and this is an episode that he did about Danny Greene, who is a Cleveland Mafia guy who apparently fucked around and found out. I'm going to be hearing this episode for the first time myself. So let's all listen, shall we? And definitely subscribe to History Goon as well if you haven't done that already. Here we go.
I didn't run away from the explosion. Someone said they saw me running away. I walked away. That was Danny Greene. My name is Kevin, and this is History Goon. What is going on, everybody? We are back again. And this time, it's been a little bit. It's been a few weeks since we dipped our toes into the world of organized crime, which seemed to have been a popular choice in the last one. The last time I did one, everybody seemed to like that. And like I said, I don't really want to do true crime stuff because, I don't really want to do serial killers and, stuff like that. There's people on this network. There's people on 1159 that are going to do that a hell of a lot better than I am. So I'm going to leave it up to them. I, on the other hand, really like doing, again, organized crime and all that stuff. So we've got another one for you. And we're going to a weird location for it. I'm sure we've already heard the guy's name, Danny Greene, and some of you may have known who he is because of a movie that came out here not too long ago. But we're not going to New York. We're not going to Boston. We're not going to Chicago. We are going to the nation's 54th biggest city, Cleveland, Ohio. Usually when I think of Cleveland, I think of unfortunate sports franchises and sadness. I don't usually think about the mob. I mean, most of the time when you think anywhere in the Midwest for Mafia stuff or organized crime, you're thinking Chicago. So not only do you have organized crime in Chicago, you've also got the Savella family in Kansas City, and their whole thing was established pre-World War I, and in some form is still kind of around today, depending on where you want to look. So one of my favorite things about Mafia episodes are the nicknames that these guys have that they give each other and give themselves. A couple of examples. These are a couple of guys from the Midwest. You have Joseph Joe Church DiGiovanni and Charlie the Wop Carrillo. There's some way better ones depending on where you want to look and how far you want to go. But we're not here to talk about those guys today. We are here to talk about Danny Greene, and we are going to start with a very unfortunate beginning. Things got bad before Danny even entered the chat here. His parents, John Henry Greene and Irene Cecilia Fallon Greene, were 20-year-old Irish immigrants, and they'd been forced into a shotgun wedding with the Justice of the Peace on November 9th, 1933. Danny is born 5 days later at Cleveland St. Anne Hospital, and sadly for him, Irene was a small, somewhat frail woman, and after squeezing Danny out, she starts to hemorrhage internally. After 3 days in the ICU, she would end up passing away. The official ruling being, official cause of death being an enlarged heart. So now we got to put ourselves in John's shoes. He's had a rough week here. Over the course of 8 days, he went from being a new husband to a new father to a new widower. With all that going on, it kind of slipped John's mind to name his son, which, I mean, yeah, you got a lot going on, and you should probably have, I don't know, maybe named your kid before your wife had passed, so you guys could have figured that out, but that's okay. He didn't end up actually naming his son until after his wife had been buried, and he just kind of went, we'll call him Daniel. That's my dad's name. So all of this stress could have been caused by the grief of everything that's going on. Also could have been the fact that John is a raging alcoholic that can barely hold down work at any of the steel mills in Cleveland. But one way or another, it was now just him and Danny. So right around now, the U.S. is starting to come into the Great Depression, and it's going to make finding work doing anything difficult, especially anything that could support John's drinking habit. Oh, and he also has to support his son. So he did eventually get a position as a salesman for the Fuller Brush Company, which, if you've ever been to a high quality restaurant like a Ponderosa Steakhouse or a Red Lobster, anything like that, where you see the servers going around with that little like wheelie thing on the handle that looks like a vacuum but doesn't make any noise. That's a Fuller brush. I had to do the looking into that, and now my Facebook algorithm is full of like restaurant equipment and cleaning stuff, and it's just fantastic. If his son wasn't a priority over his drinking, it's safe to say that working probably wasn't either, and John soon lost that job. He and wee Danny would end up moving in with John's father, Dan the elder. John's mother had recently passed due to an illness, and by their alcoholic powers combined, they equaled to less than one reasonably good parent for poor little Danny. And soon after, Danny would be placed in the quote-unquote care of the Children's Village of St. Vincent de Paul in Parma, Ohio. The orphanage had been converted from a farm and into a home specifically for the sons of Irish immigrants that couldn't, or in this case, wouldn't take care of their kids. This place consisted of 12 cottages for the boys to live in, a dining hall, a school, a church, a kitchen, a laundry room, and a powerhouse. Each of the 12 cottages would come equipped standard with 2 nuns that tried to give some type of stability to the boys' lives. When Danny arrived, there was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 450 kids and 35 nuns on the grounds, which is not a real good split. Danny spent around 5 years at the orphanage, and in that period of time, his father had remarried, and he came to get him in 1940. His father and new stepmom were living in a tiny apartment, and his new mom was not a fan of little Danny. And this is a bit of a system shock for the poor kid, because he went from an environment where he had adults that actually cared for him and tried to help him and took care of him, back to a drunken, violent, abusive life with his father. So that's got to suck. That's got to be rough for this poor kid, where most of the time you'd think being turned over to an orphanage, you're going to have a worse time than you would at home. No, not the case with Danny, as we're going to see. For any infraction that he caused around the house, he'd get booted and backhanded. And eventually, at a still very young age, he ran away back to the orphanage. And like, home life is bad when you want to go back to an orphanage. That's sad, I think would be the best way to put it. This happened enough and with such frequency that John pretty much just said whatever and gave up on Danny altogether. He wouldn't be allowed to stay at the orphanage, though. So Grandpa Daniel would take him to live with him at his tiny, tiny top floor apartment on East 147th Street in the neighborhood of Collinwood. So this particular neighborhood is a melting pot for European immigrants. It's full of Italians, Irish, Eastern European, basically, your poor whites that would all congregate into one area. And now that he's got a little bit of stability in his life, he starts attending St. Jerome's Catholic School, which is a private high school, but since he was shockingly, being, an Irish immigrant, a Catholic, he could attend for free. And he was a very, very smart young man, but didn't do well with classes. I can sympathize with this. I more than once remember hearing my mother tell me that, after parent-teacher conferences, the teachers think you're smart, but you just don't apply yourself. And I could picture that's probably what they want to say here, but it's the 1940s, so they don't know how to say that right. He did, however, excel at baseball, and skipping class. I did see something funny, like this is way before grades and ability to play sports were linked together, where like you could be a fantastic like star football player, best player on the team, but if you have like a D in English, they're not going to let you play. That's not how it happened back in the day. He was so good at baseball that on days where he had games, his teachers would just let him sleep through class so that he'd be well rested for the game after school. So on the days that he decided not to go to school, he'd be out running the streets and also hanging out with a crowd that played dice like a lot. And he apparently used to take his buddies for everything that they were worth, playing craps, and then they'd all get picked up by the cops and dumped back at school, only to be back out on the corner throwing bones the next afternoon. Getting into all this trouble forces the nuns at school to make him join the Boy Scouts. Well, everyone else is out like helping old ladies cross the street and learning how to tie half hitches. Danny is shooting pool and playing dice. One of the only meetings he would end up attending would end in panic and hilarity when Danny got bored and crawled under the tables and gave his scout leader what is referred to as a hot foot. Now, this is a prank. Also attempted, I don't know if I'd go as far as to say attempted murder or maybe like grievous bodily harm. Yeah, that probably would be better, I guess. Anyway, it's when you set somebody's shoelaces on fire. And he thought this was just the funniest thing in the world. The Scoutmaster, on the other hand, did not, and physically threw him out of the Boy Scouts, like carried him to the door, kicked the door open, and threw him out onto the sidewalk, was like, don't come back. You don't get a merit badge for that. Go away. During his later years of high school, he made enemies with a crew of Italian kids, and they used to beat the crap out of him on the regular. But we all know if there's anything that the Irish enjoy, it's a good fight. Like, I mean, I grew up with a lot of people of, I don't want to say, it's like the whole thing where you're like, Americans go to Ireland and they're like, oh, I'm Irish. I have my 3 times forever, whatever, great aunt came over here from wherever. And then like, oh no, you're just a dick. You're not actually Irish. But people of Irish heritage. I grew up with a lot of people like that. And I think it's genetic, but they do really like to fight. And most of them are pretty good at it. He was often outnumbered 3 or 4 to 1, and he gave almost as good as he got in a lot of these fights. Grandpa Daniel finally had enough of all the fighting and shipped him across town to St. Ignatius, which is a different high school. This trip would require him to take 2 different buses to get there. This didn't last long because, the school had a much lower tolerance for his tomfoolery, and he would end up back at the same school that he started at. So his first day back at his old school, the Italian kids start back in on him. Sometimes he brought it on himself, though. There are plenty of times where he would run into one of them in the hall, and I'm not going to use his exact words because I did take the exact quotes from a book, but I don't know how we feel about the name calling. So I'm going to refer to these. It's called a chicken Parmesan Americans. Okay, that's where we're going to go on that one. And that would usually result in him getting his ass whooped pretty good. Around his senior year, he had enough of school and decided it's time to move on. This isn't working out for me anymore. It's not you, it's me. We had a good time together, but I need to work on myself. So he's got his grandfather to give him permission to join the Marine Corps. And he obviously went to boot camp at Parris Island, which I know that there is other Marine Corps boot camp places you can go to, but where he's located at, he's going to Parris Island because he's closer to the East Coast than he would be to going to anywhere in California. So he's at Parris Island, and he spends most of his time after that in the Marine Corps on Camp Lejeune, hopefully not drinking the water. because he could have a case at this point, I guess. And if I remember correctly, what was it? Mesothelioma, I think, is what they were getting there. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what they were getting out of the water, because it was like, I don't remember the exact story, but there was like runoff from like jet fuel or something in the water, and like a bunch of dudes were getting sick, but it's like they're Marines, so they're like, they're really not that sick. I mean, they're still doing whatever. So Danny was a natural with firearms, and he would end up teaching a lot of firearms courses. And of course, he also kind of took up boxing, because poor Irish kid, that's kind of what they do. I think we talked about that in the Joe Barboza episode too, where boxing is a sport of poverty because you don't really need equipment for it. Everything you need was installed previously for the most part. And boxing and guns are really going to come in handy for this guy in the future. So stick that in your, got a little pocket, just pop it in there. So while he's in, he's having a hard time keeping himself out of trouble, but like nothing bad enough to get kicked out. They just shipped him from base to base until his enlistment time ran out, at which point he'd get an honorable discharge. Peace be with you. Goodbye. Do whatever you want now. So after he gets out of the Marine Corps, he decides he wants to travel a bit. He wants to see the world. He moves to New York City on December 17th, 1953. He then married a woman named June Tears, which is going to be an ironic last name for poor June here shortly. Soon after, they moved back to Cleveland, where he got a job as a brakeman in the rail yards in the neighborhood of Collinwood, where he grew up. Everything's going great, happily married, decent job, slinging brake handle on trains, life's good, until a few months later that he finds out that June was already legally married to another man. So, being a rational adult, he kicked her out and filed for divorce in 1956. Coincidentally, by the time the divorce was finalized, he had already remarried to a waitress named Nancy Hegler. So, I think it's probably safe to say that his relationships with June and Nancy were running consecutively. I think would probably be safe here. The now happy couple would have a pair of daughters, and they give them the most like Irish-American female names they could give them, Sharon and Colleen. I mean, I feel like everybody around here has got like an Aunt Colleen or an Aunt Sharon. There's a ton of them. And then you get closer to Massachusetts, and that number, it's like the closer you get to the border, the higher the number goes until they reach somewhere in the middle, around like Bennington. But that's a town nobody's ever heard of in Vermont, but it's okay. Now, with 2 kids and a wife, the brakeman money isn't really cutting it anymore. He talked to one of his uncles, and he gets him into the local 317 of the ILA, which is the International Longshoremen's Association. So he's about to go do some union work. As a member, he'd show up to the docks every day, show his card to prove that he wasn't a scab. He's not there trying to get work because some union guy didn't show up. He's a card-carrying member. And this work would include like loading and unloading ships filled with grain, iron ore, cars, other stuff like that. And while he's working the docks, Danny gets like really, really into his like Celtic ancestry. At this point, he's consumed just about every book and article that he could on the topic. He's reading about all of the greats. A couple of guys I'm going to cover at some point. Vercingetorix, Brennus, and just basically anything that he can find about these guys where they're fighting the Romans. Because this makes him think, like, hey, my ancestors fought the Romans all the time. Romans are nothing more than old-timey Italians. That's probably why I don't get along with Italians now. Which is silly, but for a guy like Danny, it makes sense. It's just how his brain works. So Nancy would eventually get sick of him, and in 1960, she files for divorce, claiming, quote, gross negligence of duty. With that divorce, Danny doesn't waste any time. He finds a new Nancy. This one's last name is Kelly. and they would have 2 sons, Daniel Jr. and Michael, obviously. They also have a daughter named Kelly. So had she not taken his last name, their daughter's name would have been Kelly, which, God, that would have been unfortunate. Anyway, ugh. Hi, my name's Mike Michaels. It's like, get a little creative here, folks. Come on, you can do it. So we're going to head back down to the docks. Danny has earned a reputation as what's called a dock walloper, which is a pretty self-explanatory thing. Anytime there's disagreements or conflicts, Danny would beat the piss out of one of his fellow workers with either fists or anything he could find handy close by. With negotiating skills like this, he quickly became an unelected leader on the docks. Whenever 2 guys had a problem, they'd go to him instead of the boss. He really expanded his reputation when he had a run-in with an official by the name of Sigvald Refsnes. Revsnes? Sigvald. We'll call him that. Is making the rounds, checking on everything, and finds our buddy Danny sleeping in a cargo hold and fires him on the spot. This wasn't a popular decision with the dock workers, or, obviously with Danny. Not long after he's fired, a chunk of machinery accidentally takes a tumble and hits Sigvald, and this injury would end up costing Sigvald the stevedore his leg. Nobody was charged for the accident because, it was an accident. Pretty common knowledge, though, amongst most of the boys on the dock that it may have been a case of Danny and maybe not an accident. Anyway, it turns out that Sigvald was just like a giant rectum anyway, so nobody was really too upset that this guy lost his job and lost his leg and whatever. This may come as a shock, but the union and the docks in general are crazy corrupt because that's kind of how things like that work, unfortunately. If you need to see, you do need to see. If you've never watched the show The Wire, go watch that. Season 2 is based completely around like a lot of like dock workers and stuff like that. And there's like a human trafficking element of it. And there's big cover-ups. And first of all, The Wire is just like fantastic. It is one of the best cop shows that's ever been made. There's literally not a bad season or episode of it at all. But season 2 does revolve more around like dock workers and stuff like that. Really good. Or you can go watch the old movie On the Waterfront. Also very good. But in this case, the head of the dock workers union went by the name of Walter Weaver. And he was a big proponent of the what they referred to as the shape up hiring model. So how this worked is everyone would gather first thing in the morning. They'd be handpicked by the foreman. The best way to make sure that you got picked was to, kick up a percentage or two to the boss to grease some palms, So you're going to pay them to pick you to come work. In 1961, someone went to the regional head of the union and told them about what was going on with Weaver, and he's running the docks, quote, as if he owned them, and he's taking bribes for work. Needless to say, an election's going to be held because Weaver's getting fired. Over the course of a couple years, Danny Greene went from like kind of a bum sleeping in the cargo section of boats, while he's working, maybe not, but possibly most definitely causing grievous bodily harm to a coworker that fired him, to being elected the head of the ILA for the Great Lakes District. We're going to meet another character here who he's going to stick around for the rest of the story. Ed Kovacic, a Cleveland detective, had this to say, quote, "He was very charismatic. He was also very tough. That's what you need to become head of the Longshoremen's Union around here." Danny didn't waste any time making improvements and updates to the ILA headquarters. He stepped in and he really Irished this place up. He had the letterhead changed to Kelly Green, had the interior painted the same Kelly Green color. He had thousands of Kelly Green ballpoint pens made up with the ILA seal on them, handed them out to members. He had the bylaws reprinted on fresh white paper and, you guessed it, Kelly Green ink. This was then pinned to the brand new Kelly Greene bulletin board. This is insane. Oh my God, there's so much Greene, I forgot. He bought himself a nice brand new Cadillac, and guess what color that was? Oh God, I couldn't imagine if the interior was the same color too. A newspaper reporter came around to write a column on the new updates to the HQ, and Danny told him, quote, "Before I got here, headquarters was a storage crate and a light bulb on a cord. Then there was his office." So let's step into his office here. Every wall in his office has got framed photos of like big time Irish American politicians, like former New York Governor Al Smith, who was at the time a presidential candidate, James A. Farley, who was the Postmaster General. And next to his desk, he had a bronzed bust of JFK. This is before his head was exploded. Mysteriously, of course, because we still don't know that, like, I'm not going to say anything. But he also had a bust of Jackie's head, her head, not, so between the two busts that were like facing each other sat a mint condition in a display case Kennedy 50-cent piece. This dude is so proud of his heritage that it's like, it's uncontrollable, right? So now that we've talked about Danny a little bit, let's talk about some of his boys that are out on the docks. His inner circle consisted of Chauncey and John Baker, Keith Ritson, who was apparently, like, from all accounts, Keith Ritson was absolutely out of his mind. Kevin McTaggart, Leon Skip Pontkever, and an ex-boxer, Arthur Sneppinger, who also had another skill set with explosives, we'll call it. Danny referred to these guys as the grievance committee. So we all know that any like self-respecting gang needs gang colors. And Danny is sitting there thinking around and he's like, I got it. We're going to get these guys leather jackets, custom made leather jackets, Kelly Greene with white sleeves jackets. So they look like Letterman jackets, but they're just so green. So green. The primary workload that these guys took on was keeping the members in line by any means necessary. One of these guys got arrested, and in his interview, he told one of the detectives, quote, "If a union member complained, he's getting a beating. If someone went to the cops, they'd catch a beating. If anyone spoke ill of Danny Greene, they'd get 2 beatings." So Danny's taking this pretty seriously, obviously. Word of some of these beatings gets back to Detective Kovacic, and he pays Danny a visit. Quote, "Everything was green. Everything. Danny Greene was all green. When we asked about the beatings, he went into his act. He started preaching about the struggles of the working man. I looked at my partner and told him, we just met Marlon Brando." That was a scene from On the Waterfront. Then he went off about the Italians. He called them just about every ethnic slur in the book, and I think he even made up some in describing the Italians from Collinwood. It was pretty obvious he didn't like them. The detectives left without arresting him because, shockingly, nobody's going to press charges against Danny. Because somebody like this, in a position of power like this, if you press charges against them, not only are you going to get your ass kicked by one of his boys, you're also never going to work for him again on the docks, which means you're not going to make any money there, meaning that if you want to stay working on the docks, you've got to go to a different city, like on the lake, to try to find work, or try to join a different union. But if you do that, they're going to call your old union and go, "Hey, this guy's here looking for work. Why is he here looking for work? Why isn't he working for you?" And they can just go, "Oh, because he's a scumbag and he's starting trouble." And they're not going to hire you because you're a scumbag and starting trouble, even though you're really not. Danny did a lot of stuff that previous union presidents didn't really do. First off, he walled off his office. It used to be that any member could just like walk right into the boss's office, make a complaint if you wanted to, just sit down and talk to him about whatever. He had a phone installed outside of his office that only rang to his phone in the office. If you needed something, you had to call him first. If you needed to pay dues, you drop them off through a slot in his office door instead of handing them off to somebody in person. He also raised union dues by 25% and fired 50 members that paid dues late on a regular basis. So that's, 25% is a crazy a crazy increase on your dues. And then like the 50 guys that were just like regularly a couple of days late making their, paying their union dues, just cans them. But of course you can't really fire somebody for that. So he was just like, they're all a bunch of drunks and bums and they're taking jobs away from guys that actually deserve them. And he also said that by getting rid of guys like this, it's actually making it easier for guys that pay their dues on time to get work. There were still those that disagreed with Danny, and when they voiced this displeasure, they are often visited either at the docks or at home by the grievance committee. Now, another thing with Danny is this guy loved being in front of the camera. He also liked talking to newspapers. Anything where he could tell somebody, my name's Danny Greene, and somebody's going to listen, he's going to do it. He's very publicity oriented when it comes to this. Whenever there's a union strike, he'd make sure that his guys showed up in droves and they filled out the numbers. Then boss man Danny would show up and use one of his favorites in front of the camera. Quote, "I want you to know that those are my men from Local 1317 who are out there doing their duty on the picket lines to protest the unfair treatment of the union members on strike. Blah, 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 blah." Okay. We get it. So head back to the docks. He had an interesting way of dealing with difficult shipping companies. So if the ship boss got like a little pissy with Danny, he would tell his guys like, "Hey, listen, be real careful when you're in there unloading stuff. It'd be a shame if you broke some lights, knocked some stuff off the walls, maybe accidentally on purpose disabled some machinery, whatever." And if that didn't work, sometimes shots would end up being fired. No joke. Guys would like take pot shots at ships to scare the bejesus out of the crew. And then they would take back off into the lake. Because you have to remember, this isn't a dock like on one of the coasts where they're bringing stuff in from Europe or South America or Asia. This is on Lake Erie. So this is stuff coming in from like New York, other parts of Ohio, Michigan, and Canada. So they're not like fleeing back into the sea. They're just like, we'll go to a different dock. We'll unload somewhere else. On one occasion, a company of stevedores are just, probably should have mentioned this earlier, just a fancy word for dock workers. So this group of stevedores are on the payroll of the shipping company, decided that they're going to bypass the docks in Cleveland and go to Ashtabula, which is about 58 miles from Cleveland. Danny catches wind about this, shuts the ports down throughout Cleveland, and orders his men from Local 1317 to get to Ashtabula and start picketing on the docks immediately. So when the regulars from the Ashtabula docks showed up to work, they're met with a wall of picketing union guys, and nobody dares cross it, not out of respect, but out of fear. So when the stevedore boss shows up to see what's going on, Danny pulls him aside and he takes him to a local diner. Gets a seat. Danny goes back out to his car and he comes back in with a bottle of like really good Irish whiskey, places it between them on the table. And they have breakfast for about 4 hours. And over the course of that 4 hours, Danny's taken a couple of like real good slugs out of the bottle, but he had this trick where he'd make it look like he was drinking way more than he actually was. And in the meantime, the stevedore boss is getting just absolutely wrecked off his face. By the time the stevedore was like poured back into his cab and back to the docks, Danny had gotten him to sign a document that the company that he worked for, which was the Best Labor Service Company, would be doing business exclusively with the docks that Danny controlled, which by the end of the day would also include Ashtabula. So he now controls docks 58 miles away from his office, and he got this giant shipping company guy wasted and kind of like forced him into making a deal where they're only going to work with him, which is kind of scuzzy, but at the same time it worked. So, I mean, if it works, it works, right? He also worked a deal where every ship associated with that company would pay a $4,000 fee that went into a retirement fund for particular ILA members named Danny Greene. So every time one of these, what was it here? Best Labor Service Company ships came through. Every time one of those ships docked to be unloaded or loaded, they paid a $4,000 fee that went directly into a bank account for Danny Greene. So he's really smart, but he is definitely a scumbag that is just stealing money from people. In a really short period of time, he's gone from an absolute nobody on the docks to now an important member of society. And like he's having dinner and rubbing elbows with local politicians. And he also starts getting to know some of the guys in the Mayfield Road mob, which were part of the Italian organized crime syndicate that was kind of part of the greater underworld of Cleveland. One of the cool places that he'd go hang out with his new Italian friends, which is really strange because, we remember how he was in high school and how he was with the cops there, where he's like, I don't really like these Italians. But anyway, he's hanging out at a place called the Theatrical Bar and Grill, which has been a mob spot since the 40s. Danny's here. He's doing some scheming. He met a pretty waitress and convinced her to quit her job and become his quote-unquote personal secretary. He also decided that such an attractive woman shouldn't be driving around in a hunk of junk car like she was, so he bought her a brand new car. And he paid for this car by raffling off the old company car. And here's the really, really sleazy part about how he does this. He informs every union member in good standing, meaning that you have been working regularly and you're paying your dues on time, that, hey, you guys are all going to be buying tickets, like books of raffle tickets. I want you guys to. I think it'd be a great idea to. You're going to be buying these raffle ticket books. So his goons go around and they start handing out books of tickets with an attached note that says, quote, "You have been issued 5 books of tickets for which you are responsible. Regardless of whether you sell them or lose them, the face value of these tickets is $30 per book." So after the raffle's all said and done, Danny goes back to his newfound running buddies. He's running around town, meeting his mobbed up friends. One guy he gets in pretty tight with is a gentleman by the name of Junior Short, who is also a stereotypical mobster. When I say stereotypical mobster, I mean he was very, very rarely seen not chewing on Cuban cigars. If you went to his office, he had a 12-gauge shotgun in his desk drawer and a 22 pistol in his jacket pocket. I mean, you may as well have just written, like henchman across his forehead, and that's what he is here. Danny would have meetings, including a few at Junior's home, but while out and about, Danny ran into and became friends with a guy named Nunzio Triscaro, who's the head of the local 436 Excavation Drivers Union. Which, I mean, could we have been any more stereotypical about like, it's an Italian guy in construction who is also in a union? Like, if I was a cop, I'd be like, listen, every single one of these guys is in the Mafia. Why can't we just hit him with RICO? Which I don't know if RICO's a thing yet or not. Anyway, these are all criminals, but we can't do anything about it because we can't do anything about it. But at this point in time, due to like all of his connections that he's got, Triscaro is the second biggest teamster in the state of Ohio, after one that I'm pretty confident everybody has probably heard of, a man by the name of Jimmy Hoffa. Some old school like FBI files have kind of fingered him as the missing link between the union and the underworld. It's hard to say. I'm not a criminologist or whatever the hell they're called. Triscaro had a neat little side business that caught Danny's attention. He owned a day labor company that worked on the same old shape up model as the unions did on the docks. When Danny needed extra guys for the 1317, he would call Triscaro and he would send as many guys as Danny needed. These guys would have to pay a quote daily work fee, which Danny and Triscaro would split in some fashion. I'm sure that Triscaro's probably getting the bigger cut due to having to facilitate the whole thing and send guys to go work for somebody else instead of working for him, just to make it even, you know. Then shortly after that, Danny would meet a guy that would alter his life forever named John Nardi. Nardi was family to some of the big-name mobsters in Cleveland, and in his mind, this gave him the right to lean on anyone in any business that he wanted to. By 23, Nardi was kind of a big name for the Cleveland Vending Machine Union, which, yeah, there's a union for everything, everybody. I know that there's a slot machine union in New Jersey and New York and down that way, where any of the little Keno machines or anything like that are in bars, all of that stuff's run by the Mafia too. So just know where you're putting your money while you're sucking back Shirley Temples or whatever you're doing. I remember the bowling alley in the next town over used to have one of those little Keno machines, and it was like, I was a kid, I never got to try it, but it just seemed weird that you could go to the bowling alley and sit in a bar and smoke cigarettes while your kids bowled and just force feed change into this thing. It's kind of weird. Anyway, to show that he's a big tough man, he went into a bar where the owner had machines being serviced by non-union repairmen. After trying to explain to this recently immigrated man from Italy that the U.S. unions, we handle that stuff here. You have a problem, you call us, you don't call them. The owner told him that he had never had them serviced, and he would have them serviced by whoever he wanted because they were his machines, because they came with the building. And Nardi decided that was incorrect and produced a blackjack and explained to him that, one more time, this is how unions work, and he beat the dog snot out of this guy. So, a little fun story off the side of that. The bar owner's wife was Irish-American and just so happened to be the cousin to someone on the police department. So the cousin would take the story to a guy that he happened to know that wasn't, a name that may have come up a time or two, and somebody's looking around into any kind of old-timey organized crime. Probably never heard of him, Elliot Ness. So Elliot Ness is taking down, some people that are a little bit bigger, a little bit more important than John Nardi, like some fat guy in Chicago that, they got on, of all things, tax evasion instead of the, 2,000 or whatever people he had the deaths ordered of. He wants to take Nardi down, on principle, just for the fun of it, basically. So much to his surprise, a few days later, Ness was there when Nardi was cut loose with no criminal charges for any of this. And this is kind of when Elliot Ness has had enough, and he's been through a full, long career of seeing just people being released for no reason, especially high-end criminals that he had spent so much time fighting and trying to put away. This was literally the last straw. Between this and the still unsolved Cleveland torso murders that are going on that he was working on, he just quits and leaves town. He's done copping, which is unfortunate because he was really, really good. So let's jump back to 1964. Danny Greene is on top of his game. One of the guys that was close to him would tell Rick Perello in an interview, that's a name we'll, again, stick that name in your pocket. We'll save that for a minute and come back to it here in a second. Quote, he'd bring 4 or 5 of us to the theatrical and pick up the check. He had portraits of all the officers and put in nice frames. He'd attend district conferences in Detroit or Milwaukee, and he bought himself a green caddy, all paid for by the local. So that brand new car that we auctioned off to pay for the new car that he has bought his side piece was not the only vehicle that he had bought with union money. So with all of this union money going out, Danny obviously needs money to start coming back in. And he's got a good scheme set up for just such an occasion with an unexpected partner. He arranged a deal with the Sherwin-Williams and International Milling Company. known for making very expensive paint and paper products, respectively, to have all their base ingredients or components or whatever loaded and unloaded by his ILA guys on the Ohio docks. Danny pocketed a quote-unquote finder's fee of $25,000, and the SW and IMC would pay the salaries of the longshoremen for the loading and unloading. So anytime one of these ships comes in, they're paying to have them unloaded on top of whatever fees that they already have to pay to have them unloaded. So he's double dipping hard and making a bunch of money. But of course, all of these checks that are being written to cover, paychecks and all this other stuff are being written to Danny Greene personally, and that money would trickle down a little bit back to the boys on the dock. As the ships are coming and going, being loaded and unloaded, Danny was about to meet another man that would become very important in his future. FBI Special Agent Martin McCann calls Danny to a meeting at this little Irish pub in Akron. So Danny sat in his car and scopes the place out. He figured that if anyone was like out to arrest him, they would have just yanked him out of the car by now. So he heads in. He found McCann and sat with him, and they drink for a while, and they're making some small talk. Obviously about their shared Irishness with a last name like McCann. After a while, the meaning for the meeting finally comes out. McCann admitted that he was part of the organized crime division and that he'd be willing to pay Danny for any information on his Italian counterparts. He made it crystal clear that he wanted nothing to do with putting Irish criminals in jail. Quote, "I could care less what any of you Irish hooligans are doing. We want the Italians. You find out what you can about men like John Scalish, and we'll look the other way when it comes to the petty stuff that's going on down to the docks with your union local." He saw this as a win-win. And I mean...
Don't blame you. Damn good deal.
Damn good deal. Because the FBI is leaving him alone. They're going to take a few Italians off the board in the meantime. Life's good. A big driving force behind this was FBI director and fishnet enthusiast J. Edgar Hoover, wanting to put as much of the quote-unquote Italian mafia in prison as possible. So how this worked was like this. Danny kept his routine up, hanging out in the bars and nightclubs, rubbing elbows with Cleveland's Italian underworld, and McCann would let him know when any investigation was coming his way on the docks. So any of the FBI files involving Danny Greene would have him referred to as Mr. Patrick, which I'm sure tickled Danny Greene. When things are looking good, Sigvald resurfaces. His ugly head reappears with an ugly name attached to it. He's hearing a lot of talk from unemployed longshoremen about the scams and schemes of Greene. Turns out Sigvald's wife, Faith Corrigan, was a journalist for The Plain Dealer, which was a fairly big paper in Cleveland at the time. She wrote a letter to her editor that would end up making its way into the book Kill the Irishman that Rick Perello wrote. And the letter went like this. On the docks here in Cleveland, which warrants investigation, a company called Best Labor Services, Inc., with offices at 3030 Woodland Ave, supplies longshoremen to the stevedore companies. The men are hired daily since the requirements for their service vary accordingly to their work. 21 day, 50 the next. They are paid by the stevedoring firms the regular longshoreman's rate, which I believe to be close to $3 an hour, which, I mean, back then, that's not bad money. However, the checks are delivered to an agent of Best Labor, which is entitled to cash them. The workers get $1.25 an hour, of which 17 cents is charged to labor. The rest goes to Best Labor. The workers are mostly Negroes, many illiterate and falling under the category of moving meat. They have no idea how much money they're really entitled to, and that the papers they sign give Best Labor the right to an exorbitant rate. Cleveland Stevedore has a contract with the union to get all the labor through the union, and the rumor on the docks is that Danny Greene, the ILA head here, is behind Best Labor Service since the workers are union members. On the books, Greene gets $6,000 a year salary from the union, but he drives a brand new Cadillac automobile and displays other material forms of wealth. I hear the Cleveland Stevedore Company is beginning to supply the men with their check stubs so that they will know just how much they make. This needs confirmation. The hourly scale for longshoremen is $2.68 an hour. By contract with the ILA, laborers must be hired through the union, which means calling Danny Greene each evening. Men from the best labor outfit show up for the jobs, while the union hall has men sitting around waiting for jobs. The only way the best labor outfit could learn about the jobs is through Danny Greene. You'll be supplied with a list of laborers involved next week. So the editor sent another reporter to the docks to look into these claims, so Sam Marshall would spend hours on the docks questioning the workers. Most would give him a blank stare or flat out tell him to kick rocks. There were a few, though, that spoke to him. One said, quote, "He had us by the short and curlies. If we didn't do what Danny told us, we might as well be invisible. Some of us work on the grain ships for no pay, and if we get upset about it, we don't get rehired." Marshall decided to be a big man and go right up and start talking to Danny. This would cause Danny to go off the rails. Shocker. This guy's got a temper? No way. He told Marshall, "This is the work of the Italians, that or disgruntled union men with an axe to grind, and they are making stuff up to my detriment." Of course, it's the Italians, because it always is, right? Marshall then published the story, and Agent McCann and Danny were equally upset. Federal attorneys started a full investigation into the docks, and more importantly, the head of the 1317, Thomas Gleason, the national president of the ILA. And he caught wind of everything going on, and he loses it. The September 15th, 1961 edition of the Toledo Blade had a snippet involving Gleason. Thomas A. Gleason said last night in New York that he ordered an inquiry after reading published reports of some complaints by members of the Longshoremen's Local 1317 that were forced to contribute to the union's building fund. Mr. Gleason also said he received a petition signed by 92 Local 1317 members demanding that their union be placed in trusteeship immediately so that we can hold a, quote, free election for leadership of their choice. The dissident union members also asked Mr. Gleason to handle the investigation of union funds and to make an accounting of money members were allegedly pressured into giving the union by working without pay on grain unloading jobs. Daniel Greene, local president, has denied any member was forced to contribute to the building fund and said donations were voluntary. He blamed the investigation on dissident members of the union. He blamed the investigation on dissident members of the union opposed to the takeover of the union in 1961. So now the government is clearly onto him, and he gets served a subpoena to bring all of the financial records for the 1317. And not long into the investigation, it's pretty obvious that he's done exactly the opposite. The investigators get a warrant and raided his office and found some paperwork that Danny maybe forgot that was there. It was in a box I didn't see. Whatever, I don't know. I can't be expected to take care of all this paperwork. What do you think? I am the head of the union? So it seemed that he may have forgotten to pay contributions to the welfare system, and it seems like he may have forgotten to pay taxes a couple of times. Whoops. They also found something odd. During the renovation of the headquarters, Danny had a series of microphones hidden in the walls and ceilings. No room is off limits. They were in the hallways, the lunchrooms, break rooms, around the coffee pot. They had some in the bathrooms where people are pooping, and they are all linked back to a hidden tape recorder in his office. So you can't even talk to the dude next to you trying to take a dump about how much you hate your boss, because your boss is going to hear it while you're talking to the dude next to you trying to take a dump in the bathroom. So the feds find the recorder in a pile of tapes in a secret hidden compartment in the wall, and they kind of take that too because it's all technically evidence. Danny went to visit his attorney's office trying to square away the heaps of evidence when a car crept slowly past his home in the Cleveland suburb of Willoughby, and a gunman opened up on the house. Dozens of rounds punched through his siding and windows, ripping into the house. His wife and their 2 daughters are inside, but completely unharmed, thankfully. Message sent, message received. After this incident, he would resign from the Local 1317 on September 13th, 1964, which is also the date after he was suspended from any union activities. How convenient, right? the legal system does its thing, making the process as slow and convoluted as possible. And 2 years later, Danny Greene would be convicted on 3 counts of embezzlement and 2 counts of falsifying records. But here's the thing. This is Danny Greene's first offense. So the sentence was suspended from the 5 years he was facing. He's also, now he's just basically banned from any union-related activities. Within a few days of being ousted from the union, he started Emerald Industrial Relations. He specialized in quote-unquote protection against union discord and supply problems and work stoppages. So that sure sounds like he created a company to do strike breaking, which I'm pretty confident is illegal. But what do I know? So having no money after all of his accounts are frozen by the feds, he's in need of some startup capital. So he went into business with Uncle Frank Brancato, who was himself a former stevedore, and more importantly, he's in pretty tight with John Scalish, who is the godfather of Cleveland. Yeah, man, it's about to get weird. So Danny's first client was the Cleveland Solid Waste Trade Guild, which is just a super churched up way of saying, trash collectors union. At a meeting with the higher-ups of this union, which he wasn't supposed to be involved with because he's not supposed to be around any union activities of any sort, even if it's not a union he's worked for before, he told the members, quote, "If others don't join, we'll follow their trucks and take away their stops. Offer to pick up for less, take away their business at the cheapest price, and knock them out of the box. There are a lot of ways we can do this, and then we'll split up the stops and give them to the guild members." So by 1964, Danny had gotten in with an old-timey Jewish mobster named Shondor Burns, who, I could probably find enough to do like a Patreon exclusive with him if we want to do like that for some organized crime stuff, because I'm not sure I could do a full episode. I probably could. I just have to figure out if there's any resources on him. Anyway, they spend a lot of time hanging out at the theatrical. Burns saw a lot of his younger self in Danny. He's someone that's smart, formidable, tough. He can hold his own. Burns would end up turning over some of his business ventures over to Greene, mostly in like the black neighborhoods, collecting money and putting it back out on the street. Loan sharking, which, we've spoken about that before. And he's starting to make money pretty good, like considering he's putting it back out between like 5 and 25%, which the 25% is insane. Meaning like, so say you borrowed $100 from Danny Greene. You have to pay him back the $100, and then there's a 25% fee on top of that. So you have to pay him back $125. And then I'm sure if you don't pay it back within a reasonable time, that 25% goes from like a one-time fee to like it's 25% every day until you pay him back. And that could end up really, really costing you a lot of money or physical ability to move or be alive, depending, I guess. In 1967, Burns gets hemmed up for bribing a police officer. That officer also showed up to, be the chief witness against him in court, which not great. Aside from that, the IRS hit him with charges of, quote, underreporting assets. So instead of fighting everything, he just kind of pled guilty and he's sent off to the Atlanta federal prison on tax evasion charges. And this would leave Danny in charge of all of Burns' rackets in Cleveland. In 1971, Burns somehow made parole and returns to the streets of Cleveland. And in between parole meetings, he could be found at his old haunt back up at the theatrical. Greene would see him pretty frequently there, and they would always be talking business. One of these talks found Burns telling Danny that there's a customer that wasn't paying up and a message needs to be sent. Burns didn't want him dead, so he told Danny, no fists, no guns. He wants to bomb his house to really, send the message home. So Danny parks his car a block from the target house with a live bomb sitting on the bench seat next to him in his car. Danny has no experience with explosives, and he wasn't super comfortable about having this thing in his car. So he rightied himself, he lit the fuse, and stepped on the gas. Game plan is to just chuck it out the window at his house like he's delivering newspapers. Danny didn't realize that this fuse is going to burn off as fast as it does. So he's driving, he's got the fuse burning a little bit faster than expected, and he decides to just abort mission and get this bomb out of the car. So he throws it towards the open passenger's window, and here's where things get real fun. So he throws this Looney Tunes style bomb towards the passenger's window. It bounces off the inner door frame and lands smack dab directly in Danny's crotch. He's wrestling with the bomb and the door handle at the same time, and just in the nick of time, he opens the door and falls out of the car, and as he's falling, he rolls the bomb off of his crotch back in. So as he's sliding across the pavement, the bomb explodes and blows the roof off of his car. Danny's a little banged up. He ruptured his right eardrum in the blast, so he would kind of have hearing issues on that side of his head for the rest of his life after that. Then just like scrapes and bruises and road rash and all that. Not all that much worse for wear, I guess. When the police arrived, because, a car exploded in a neighborhood in a residential area, Danny told them that he was, in fact, the victim of a drive-by car bombing, and that the only thing that saved him was, of course, the luck of the Irish. Almost blowing himself up didn't stop him from continuing to work with the union. So he meets back up with Frank Brancato, and he brought him in and made him responsible for bringing in new union members, and he'd bring Art Sneppinger into the fold, our member of the grievance committee, with explosives experience that probably would have been a better candidate for bombing this dude's house than Danny. Whenever new members refused to join, Danny would send Art to deal with them. If he couldn't convince them with words, he would just, blow their trucks up. In one case, a guy named Mike Fratto joined the union. This guy was the father to a herd of children. He's got 14 kids with 3 different women, but he was generally a good-spirited guy. Like, he got along with everybody. He'd, joke around and have fun. He was apparently a good dad, even though he had, 14 kids with 3 different women, but he seems like a decent guy. So he's in the union for a while until the likes of Danny Greene get involved, at which point he left because, in his words, quote, "The guild was a beautiful thing at first, but then the wrong people took control. I didn't need that anymore." And he said that to a newspaper reporter, which was a pretty not smart idea on his part. Danny sent his bomber out to take care of Fratto after reading about that in the paper. Sneppinger had kind of mixed feelings on this, though, because he had become buddies with Big Mike. Like, they're boys. Like, him and Mike would hang out. They'd go have beers. How's the, clutch of children? They're good. So Sneppinger plants a bomb on the bottom of Mike Fratto's car one night. As he's walking back to his car, he's got a change of heart, and he returns and he removes it. He then took it a step further, and he called Mike and told him, "Hey, man, I just planted a bomb on your car. I took it off. Danny Greene's the one that sent me here to try to kill you." Sneppinger would leave the guild after that. He moved to a new place, left his wife and kids on their own, basically put himself in witness protection by getting as far away from Cleveland as humanly possible. Because he knew that if he were to stay around and Danny Greene were to find him, he's done. He's a dead man. Danny, on the other hand, was not in a rush for payback, at least with Sneppinger. Within a few weeks of the bombing campaign starting, Detective Kovacic got a tip that Sneppinger was his guy, that he was, this is the dude that's blowing stuff up all over the place. He sent some of his guys out, and they found him and dragged him back to the station so he could have a little chat with the detective. Sneppinger was a better bomber than secret keeper, and he spills his guts to the detective, And he told him all about the stuff Danny's been doing with the union, all the below board stuff that's going on. And the biggest surprise to the detective is that he finds out that Danny Greene is an FBI rat. The police turn Sneppinger loose. I'm not sure if they could get more out of, I don't know if they would have been able to turn him loose and be like, hey, go try to get more out of Danny and bring it back to us. I don't know if that was the game plan or not, but they cut him loose. October 31st, 1971, Danny called Sneppinger to a meeting and told him that he wanted the job done and he wanted it done right and he wanted Fredo dead. Aside from the trash hauling business, Fredo was also the co-owner of the Swan's gas station in the Coventry Village area of the city. Around 1 a.m. on November 1st, a massive explosion rocks the area of the gas station. When the police arrived, they found a smoldering corpse under a bunch of heavy debris about 10 feet from the east side of the station. The body didn't belong to Fredo. It's Art Sneppinger. It seemed like that he had a bit of a slip up, and he may have blown his payload prematurely. And it turns out that Mike Fredo wasn't even at the store when it exploded. During a canvass of the area, more than one person witnessed a Kelly Green Lincoln cruising around and had been seen leaving the area with a quickness shortly after the explosion. So over the course of the next month, Mike Fredo changed his life. He figured, like, he's the target of the bombing. He took a few steps to protect himself here. He got himself a neat little unregistered handgun, which, I mean, I'm not saying anything, but if I'm not going to register my car, I'm not going to... No, I'm kidding. He also made friends with a guy named Gus Palladino, who's an up-and-coming gangster for one of the smaller Italian families. Between the two of them, they came up with a great idea. We are going to kill Danny Greene. So between the two of these guys, they come up with a brilliant idea that Danny Greene couldn't kill Mike if Danny got dead first, right? On Friday, November 26th, less than a month after Sneppinger was blown up trying to kill Fredo, he and Palladino turned onto the intersection of 140th Street and Lakeshore Boulevard. Danny just so happens to be out walking his 3 dogs when he saw the Buick Riviera coming towards him. The car slowed down and the two exchanged pleasantries of, quote unquote, you Mick mother, said Mike. Danny responded in kind. Yeah, you spaghetti and meatball American. So after this exchange, Fredo pulled his piece and starts firing out the window. Danny does the right thing. He lets go of the dogs because a gunfight is no place for dogs. I mean, there's a series of documentaries about what happens when you kill a guy's dogs. He kills like 1 million Russian gangsters. So he grabbed the .38 that he kept in his waistband, and Danny ran up on the car while Fredo is still firing. From what was said later, Fredo kind of fired his revolver dry and he's trying to reload. The car took off and Danny fired twice at a distance of 25 feet. One round hit the passenger side mirror. The other hit Mike Fredo right between the eyebrows. So to put that into perspective, 25 feet with a .38 caliber revolver on a moving target to hit some dude in the face is a pretty good shot. Like, I don't think I could do it. I mean, especially like you're all like jacked up on adrenaline and you're like, oh, I got to find my dog still too, but I got to kill this guy first. That's pretty good. So by the time Palladino got to the hospital, Mike Fredo was much closer to room temperature than he was that morning. Danny went into hiding until that Sunday when he called the Cleveland Police Department and asked to speak to Detective Jim Fierst. The two met at a seedy hotel and Danny pled his case of self-defense. Fierst believed him, but told him he still had to go downtown and like put everything on record. He told them that he thought he just winged the guy, but then he saw the papers the next day that he died and he decided to kind of like lay low for a while. In full disclosure, because Danny was an upstanding citizen, he told them where they could also find the gun. After talking to the police for over 2 hours, he's turned loose. Luck of the Irish, indeed. Because there's no charges, because it was self-defense, and he didn't think he actually killed the guy, and he gave them the murder weapon. So I really wanted to include this. Danny told his buddy Burns that he wanted to open a quote-unquote after-hours club in eastern Cleveland, where local connected guys could go and get drunk and gamble. After doing some math, Danny figured he's going to need about $70,000 to get it going. But due to his own terrible gambling, drinking, and whoring habits, Danny is flat broke. He asked Burns for a loan, but he's also kind of on the lower end of his funds. But he knew a guy that wasn't. So they take a trip east and have a sit down with Genovese crime family boss, Fat Tony Salerno, who, yes, eventually, yes. After they get a couple of drinks in him, Burns gets down to business and he asks for a loan on behalf of his Irish friend, to which Fat Tony said, quote, "Why are you getting involved with those crazy Irish? Our friends in Brooklyn," meaning the Gambino family, "are doing the same with those nutty Westies out there in Hell's Kitchen. You can't trust these Irish. They have no sense of honor." And I wanted to put that in there because I am also definitely going to be covering the Westies. I have, oh my God, 3 books. 3 books on the Westies that I've read and reread, and I definitely will be covering the Westies. It's well worth it to talk about Mickey Featherstone and Jimmy Coonan and the rest of their crew. They are out of their minds. So after a few days being back in Cleveland, Burns got word that the money was his, but he had to figure out how to get it out to Cleveland. He sends a numbers runner and drug dealer by the name of Billy Cox to pick it up. Numbers runners were basically guys that, like, with any of the gambling stuff, these guys would be like running back and forth between bookies and like collecting the like lottery numbers and stuff like that, and then, you know, turning them over to wherever and bringing them to everybody else to distribute it, to tell people, you know, hey, here's your money if you want anything. If not, here's what you owe. He's also a drug dealer, so I mean, probably not the most upstanding member of society, I guess. Cox, being a drug dealer and kind of an idiot, decided that he could use the $70,000 to buy a bunch of uncut, pure cocaine and sell it for what he figured to be like $300,000. In the process of mixing the additives to cut the purity and increase the amount of product, the police are tipped off. So he's taken that $70,000 that he was supposed to bring from one of the scariest crime families in the country back to Cleveland, bought cocaine, bought all the stuff to cut it to try to sell more cocaine and make more money, even though there's less cocaine in what he's selling because there's all the cut and stuff in it. And the cops get tipped off while he's trying to cut it, and because he's a paranoid drug addict, he flushes as much of it as he could down the toilet and threw the rest out an open window. So guess who really doesn't care where the cocaine or money went? That's the Genoveses. As far as they were concerned, Danny wanted the money and he was responsible to pay it back, even though it never made it that far, because this idiot took the money and literally flushed it down the toilet. Oh boy. So back to Cleveland crime families here. After the death of John Scalish, a guy named James Blackie Licavoli is elected the new boss, and due to his friendship with John Nardi, Danny is about to find himself at odds with Burns and the Italians out east. Shondor Burns went back to New York to have another face-to-face with Fat Tony. He told him the whole story about the money and all this. Salerno informed him that since he brokered the deal, Burns is actually responsible for paying it back, plus 5% a week, which that's a lot of money. But for the disrespect from Danny Greene, Tony Salerno told Burns to have him taken care of. When Burns returned to Cleveland, he's got a meeting with the higher-ups in the mob, and he told them that Salerno authorized a $25,000 open contract on the former head of the ILA Danny Greene. So at this point, every Tom, Dick, and Nunzio in Cleveland saw this as a quick money grab, and they start attempting to kill Danny Greene wherever they can. One of these attempts came when Danny pulled up to get some gas. The station attendant noticed that there's, something hanging off the bottom of his car. Looks kind of weird. So Danny crawls up underneath the car and he finds that the duct tape that had been used to secure a bomb to his car had partially broken. So Danny, being a rat, got a hold of Detective Kovacic, and he didn't realize this. That I guess at this point, Kovacic had moved just a few blocks away from Greene out in Collinwood. And the pair of them meet up at a restaurant, and Danny handed Kovacic a battery, a timer, a broken clothespin, and a couple of blasting caps. So the detective's got all this random crap in his hands. He's like, what the hell is this? He's like, where's the dynamite if this is a bomb? And Danny's like, it wasn't dynamite, it was C4, and it's headed back to whoever sent it to me in the first place. Which is a wild thing to tell a cop. To be like, no, yeah, there was explosives with it, but I found them, and I've returned them to sender. Nothing like admitting to a crime, which is insane. March 5th, 1975, Shondor Burns is leaving Christie's Lounge, where he'd been having some drinks with a couple of his buddies. He's telling him that, he's planning on moving down to Miami, and he's going to spend the rest of his days on the beach, just drinking, staring at half-naked women, living the life. He says his goodbyes, walks outside, and climbs into his powder blue Cadillac Eldorado, which is pretty excellent, I would say, that's parked across the street from St. Malachi's Church. When he slid the key into the lock and turned it, the explosive that was rigged to the tumbler went off and cut Shondor Burns in half at the waist. The blast was so powerful that they found pieces of him on the stairs of the church, which is about 75 feet away from the blast. One of the guys he'd been drinking with came running out and saw him laying on the ground, grabbed Burns under the arm and tried to drag him to safety, and realized that he's only dragging the top half. Anybody want to wager a guess as to what the type of explosive used in this was? Because it wasn't dynamite, it was C4. Wonder where that came from. Anyway, the death of Burns didn't fix any of Danny's problems, it made it worse. Not long after that, Danny and his wife separated, and he moved into an apartment not far from where he'd grown up. Here he made what could have been a fatal mistake for a normal human being when he walked into the clubhouse of the local Hells Angels and basically told them to keep it down with the motorcycles. And if they didn't, he's going to blow up their clubhouse because they're making too much noise, drawing too much attention to the neighborhood. This is probably him trying to keep the cops and feds out of the area. Which, I mean, again, telling the Hells Angels to not be Hells Angels, they probably could have killed him right there. I don't know why they wouldn't have. Unless they're just like, this guy's got balls to just walk in here and tell us to shut up. Another pretty common thing that a lot of gangsters do, that Danny would also do, is he made friends with all the neighborhood kids. He's spending hundreds of dollars a week on the ice cream truck for local kids and helping old ladies cross the street. I mean, he is a Boy Scout after all. But he still does have his enemies. May 12th, 1975, two guys trying to make a name for themselves and climb the ladder to bomb on the front and back of Danny's apartment. He's in bed with his new girlfriend when the first bomb went off and threw him out of bed. While he's laying on the floor collapsed under him, and he ended up in what was left of the kitchen. Bruised, cut, battered, the proud owner of 2 broken ribs, Danny goes back up to check on his girlfriend. She dodged a bullet, an air conditioner, technically. It landed less than a foot from her head, and this is a 1975 air conditioner, so it's probably roughly the size of a Geo Metro. So if that had fallen on her, it would have just exploded her head like a grape. Unfortunately, Danny's 4 cats didn't make it out of the explosion. The dogs did, though, so there's a silver lining, I guess. Danny and his girlfriend got into his somehow undamaged green Cadillac and took off before the cops and bomb squad showed up. Detective Kovacic heard the explosion. He probably felt it also because he was that close. He's the first cop on scene. He apparently showed up in like pajama pants, a bathrobe, and slippers, which is wild. When the bomb squad arrived, they found an unexploded unit on the back, which was a 6-inch by 4-inch block of C4 rigged up to a 5-gallon can of gas. If this one had gone off, it probably would have leveled like half a block, because that's a lot of C4. That would have done some serious damage to the neighborhood. So Danny would eventually have the rubble removed, and he had a pair of single-wide trailers dropped off in the lot, one for his home, and the other is his office. He had a huge banner flying from the business trailer saying, quote, "Future home of the Celtic Club." A great detail. Was like 90% of the time, Danny is just like hanging out shirtless in a lawn chair, drinking beer and waving at passersby. Like it's his full-time job. He's just, being a dude. A lot of people said that he was doing this to show that he wasn't scared of like whoever is out to get him. Basically, like, if you want me, you know exactly where to find me, kind of thing. And he still doesn't have any issues giving interviews to the news, and he did it frequently. A few weeks after he started giving interviews, he decided to go for a jog, get some cardio in, So he's out for his run. He's not too far from where he self-defensed Mike Fredo, when some guy hiding in the bushes up ahead takes a shot at him. This guy's about 200 feet away, and he missed. Danny hits the deck and returns fire. The sniper runs off, and Danny missed every shot. But, again, since this is not a ballistics podcast, because, I don't think a lot of people would want to listen to that, 200 feet away is a bit out of range for a 38. 200 feet is, and that's more like you want a rifle or a shotgun at that range. 200 feet for a shotgun's kind of pushing it unless you have slugs, but that's fine. And a 38's not really a big round anyway. So a New York Times article came out after Danny's death stating that this would have been the 12th attempt on his life in 7 years. Cleveland Magazine published a poem, and this is so bad, but I have to read it. It's so bad, and I'm so sorry that I have to read it. Published a poem that was sent in by a reader called The Ballad of Danny Greene. And it goes like this. Among the crow, the stories say, a man was judged by fiercest foe. Many scalps a brave chief took. He fought his way to fame. Often he outwitted death, ere history priced his name. A modern warrior known as Greene was very quick and smart and mean. He scrambled hard and fought like hell and led a charmed existence. That doesn't rhyme, sorry. They shot him down and blew him up with most regular persistence. Through guile and luck and skill, Danny Greene is with us still. He does his job as he must do with zeal, finesse, and pride. It's hard to keep a good man down with St. Patrick at his side. Someday he'll die, as we all must. Some will laugh, but most will cry. His legend will live on for years to bring his friends mixed pleasure. For he has done both bad and good and lived his life full measure. Ugh. God. If there's one thing worse than like having to out loud read terrible poetry, I would love to know what it is, because it's just, that was painful. Like, I felt that in my soul having to read that and just thinking that somebody wrote this and went, yeah, that's good. I'm going to send that to the newspaper. They're going to love it. And then, 55 years later, some jackass is sitting behind a microphone with a tweed vest and a tie on and going like, man, you're terrible at this. I really hope you didn't give up your day job to write poetry, because you ain't going to pay the bills with that, man. That's bad. Anyway, Danny started moving in on some of the traditional Italian rackets in the city due to some like fighting in the family. His old buddy, John Nardi, is about to make a power move and needed some muscle. And that's where Danny came in. Nardi's first move was against a guy called Remember those mafia names we were talking about? Lips Masseri, who's running a gambling ring, he informed Lips that he was entitled to a part of that money. And Lips told him that he was entitled to nothing. Lips went to the new boss, Blackie Licavoli, and told him about this exchange. And that night, the pair decided that Nardi and Greene gotta go, like permanently. On a long-term basis, they have to be gone. The next move came against Eugene Casillo, who's Blackie's capo, so like a lieutenant, like basically like your third, fourth in line somewhere in there in the Mafia. They had to be careful because this is a man that once cracked a man's skull open over cheating at pool. Casillo was returning home July 22nd, 1976 from a dinner with some friends. He reaches the top stair onto his porch, and then the explosive device that had been planted next to the door in a flower pot went off. Dozens of nails ripped into his chest, side, and stomach. A few had made it far enough into his body to pierce his gallbladder and large intestine, which is pretty gross. He somehow survived this attack after of course, he's got a cousin right there, because we're talking about the Irish and the Italians, who, like, if anybody's got cousins, it's the Irish and the Italians. And one of his cousins just so happens to be walking by, and he dragged him off to the hospital. After a couple weeks in the hospital, he signed himself out and takes off for Florida. When word got out that he left the hospital on September 26th, another bomb exploded outside of his front door just to make sure, even though he's not there anymore. While Casillo was in the hospital, Lips Masseri went missing in mid-August. His car was found at the Akron Holiday Inn. That's got to be the worst place in the world to be found for anything. With a trunk full of blood, and the last time Masseri was seen alive was leaving his gambling hall where Nardi had confronted him earlier in the year. You can't kill a mob underboss and get away with it, generally. And word came from the five families in New York City. The five families, like, a very big deal, because they were kind of like, they were competitors, but they also worked together somewhat. But the five families were the Buonono crime family, the Colombo crime family, the Gambino crime family, the Genovese crime family, and the Lucchese crime family. And word came from them that until the Greene-Nardi problem has been solved, the Cleveland families are going to be, quote, put on the shelf, meaning that until the situation's concluded, they're not going to be doing business with them. And they need to clean their own house before they were allowed to have company again, basically. So Blackie called a meeting of his inner circle, and they decided that they needed to bring in an outsider. They called Jimmy the Weasel Fradiano, who is an acting boss. He's like out on the West Coast. I'm not sure if he was like California or Nevada, somewhere out that direction, but he's out on the western half of the country. He met with the new acting underboss, Tony Dope, which I don't know if that's his real name or not. And they conversed at the hotel near the airport in Cleveland. While this is going on, Blackie is in New York having to sit down with a newly crowned head of the Gambino family, Paul Castellano. Tony Dope is telling Fradiano that the plan is to lure Greene and Nardi to a meatpacking plant in New Jersey, which is not far from a place that they frequented. They wanted to kill them and freeze their bodies, which sounds like some stuff that another guy that I may cover, even though the more I learn about him, the more I think he's probably at least 70% full of it. Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, would have been involved in, considering he did work for all five families, according to him. And I mean, yeah, he's a very interesting character because he'll tell all these wild stories about how he killed like 17,000 people. And, he killed, he's the one that actually like killed Jimmy Hoffa, and he knows where he was buried. And like they put him in a barrel, and then like the barrel was dug up and sent to Toyota for scrap metal, because we were doing that back in the 70s and 80s, I guess. But I don't really know. I mean, I was going to say I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but he was a scumbag. So I don't know. I don't know how much of his stories I believe. There's a really good book written about him called Iceman, but again, it's all him just telling stories to the author. So it's like you kind of got to take it with a giant grain of salt. But anyway, late in 1976, Tony Dope and Blackie invited Ray Ferretto to a meeting. This is a big opportunity for Ferretto to make a name for himself. So Ray assembles his crew and they start planning. They didn't know that a dozen times before Danny had escaped death, but early September of the same year, Nardi is leaving the American Brotherhood Club in the Little Italy part of Cleveland when a sniper started ripping off a couple of shots at him from a nearby bridge. Sniper fires a handful of shots before people, come running out, and Nardi dove into his car and stepped on it. So he escapes unscathed here. A few days later, while sitting at a red light, a car pulls up next to him. He dove to the floorboard as a shotgun shredded the driver's side of his car. So after the second attempt on Nardi, Danny has his guys plant a bomb on Ali Calabresi's new Lincoln Continental. Calabresi is a supporter of Blackie, so he's obviously an enemy. We have to make sure that we get this one guy who probably isn't the one trying to kill him, is just, associated with. Calabresi shared a driveway with his neighbor, Frank Perico. Frank Perico is just a regular dude, no connections with anyone, just a hardworking guy. He'd park his car behind Frank and leave his keys under the floor so that Frank could move the car when he got out to go to work in the mornings. So when he turned the key to move Allie's car, it sent bits of Frank in all directions, including bone fragments and gore, against the side of Calabresi's home. Keep in mind, Danny is covered. He's still ratting for the FBI. So anything that's being done here, he's really like, I don't know. You can't really say that I'm doing anything wrong because I'm doing exactly what my handler wanted me to do by getting information, and maybe or maybe not I'm associated with some of these killings, but you can't really prove it, so I'm fine. So after this, Greene and Nardi knew that they're kind of marked, so they head for Texas. They purchase a massive cattle farm, which is a good idea because neither one of them have a single clue what they're doing, trying to raise cattle. It's kind of like run down and in need of a lot of repairs, and probably more repairs than it's actually worth. Then Nardi does something really, really stupid. He plans a trip to New York to have a meeting with Paul Castellano because Paul Castellano owned a series of meat packing plants and he had some knowledge of the beef industry. Remember, we were gonna try to lure these idiots to a meat packing facility. Like a couple minutes ago, we just talked about this. We're going to try to lure them here to do this, and instead he just shows up on his own accord to ask for help, even though these people are actively... Anyway, oh God. This guy's IQ is right around the same as his shoe size. So Castellano knew that Danny still owed money to Fat Tony, and he also knew that there was a target on these guys. I'm not sure why they did it this way, but Nardi and Greene went back to Cleveland and parked at the airport and flew to New York. Apparently, 1976, Texas has no airports. I hold on here. Just for a laugh, I'm going to do some on-the-fly research. So, Cleveland, Ohio, to Texas, just in general, I guess. So let's call it Dallas, right? We're gonna say that they were outside of Dallas. Okay, so if these guys were outside of Dallas, just as a example, because I can't just let this go. My brain doesn't work that way. They would have had to driven 17 hours from Dallas to Cleveland to then fly to New York City, which is like a 2-hour flight, if that. The stupidity knows no bounds here. This is so dumb. Anyway, so they meet with Castellano, and he told him that he would consider their proposition and had one of his boys, take them back to LaGuardia to fly him back to Cleveland. As soon as they're in the air, a call is made to Butchie Cisterno, who's who's at the airport hotel in Cleveland. He drives over to Danny's car and plants a bomb under the hood. He's got a garage door opener that's set to the same frequency as the blasting caps, and he's going to blow Danny Greene to hell from his hotel room. When Greene and Nardi arrive back at the car, Cisterno gets all fired up, and as soon as Danny closed the driver's door, he starts hitting the button on the garage door opener, and nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Why is nothing happening? The car started and took off, and Butchie just keeps hitting the button, and nothing's happening, so he's getting all nervous. When they get back to his trailer, one of Danny's guys pops the hoods to check the oil and finds the bomb. Luck of the Irish again. Danny put out feelers to the underworld and found out about the contracts on his head and Nardi's head. And he told Nardi, quote, "Blackie's my friend. He wouldn't hurt me. I've known him my whole life." That is what we call in the business burying the lead. May 17th, 1977, John Nardi finished a Teamsters Union meeting as the secretary-treasurer. He was walking across the parking lot when he hit the button in his pocket to open the car door and start it. This is actually, I guess, a pretty common trick for like gangsters back in the day. They would have some kind of a device rigged up to start the car remotely, which, I mean, that's not anything big anymore, but they could also open the door to make sure that there was nothing connected to that to set it off. So as he climbed into his 1976 Olds 98, which is a sweet car, he's good. Everything's good. Closes the door. The red Pontiac next to him explodes and kills him. Several pounds of nuts and bolts struck Nardi's torso. The explosion was so powerful that it ripped the roof off of both cars completely. Nardi was still alive when his brother Nick got to him. By the time the ambulance arrived at St. Vincent's at 3:30 p.m., he's dead. 2 weeks after Nardi was exploded, Tony Dope Del Santer died of an unexpected heart attack. After the wake, Cleveland mob boss Blackie Licavelli took Ray Ferretto for a drink and they start talking business. He played a tape that he had acquired from the dental offices of Dr. Candoli for all the gathered associates. The call was between Danny's girlfriend, Debbie, and the receptionist. Debbie explains that Danny had a loose filling and it's kind of bothering him and he needs it fixed because it's just annoying. It's kind of painful. If you've ever had a loose filling, it's not great. The Cleveland mob now knew where Danny Greene would be for a little bit. On October 5th, Ferretto drove to the apartment of Ronnie the Crab Carabia, where they would assemble 3 sticks of dynamite, nails, nuts, and bolts into a bomb. The following day, Ferretto drove a blue Plymouth into the parking lot of the Brainerd Medical Building. The Crab followed in a maroon 1970 Chevy Nova, which again, pretty sweet car. He parked next to the Plymouth and they climbed into the passenger seat next to Ferretto. At 2:15, another vehicle, a dark-colored Chevy, parked on the other side of the Plymouth. This car contained 2 men with high-powered rifles. These guys were the contingency plan, I guess would be the best way to put it. If the bombs didn't go off, the rifles definitely will. At 2:45, Danny Greene's green Lincoln rolled into the parking lot and into an empty spot between 2 other cars. This kind of throws a little bit of a monkey wrench into the works, and this crew starts to panic a little bit. Danny walked within 50 feet of the vehicles full of men that wanted him dead. They didn't realize that the leather bag that he was carrying had a Browning high power and enough 9mm rounds to start and end a small-scale mob war. The shooters took aim, but were waved off as 2 women walked out of the building and directly between them and Danny. At this point, the gunmen they're like about to blow this, and Danny had just parked between 2 other cars and things aren't going well. But an opportunity is about to show itself. The women passed between Greene and the shooters, climbed into the car, parked on the driver's side of Danny's Lincoln. Carabia scrambles back into the Nova, gets it back over next to the Green Continental as quickly and carefully as possible, arms the explosive, and runs back to the Plymouth. Ferretto approaches the car with the shooters in it and told them, hey, just get out of here. We got it covered. Things worked out. The plan's going to be fine. So Carabia is sitting in the car with a detonator in hand. Ferretto gets back in the car, and as soon as Danny walked out of the building at 3:25, they pulled out of the parking lot very slowly. Carabia is glued to Danny's every move as he squeezed between the Nova and the Continental. So here's the thing with old Lincolns, is they've got really, really long doors. The Nova was parked close enough that Danny had to be careful not to ding someone else's car. So as Danny Greene is gingerly opening the door to the car, the Nova exploded, throwing him into the air. Danny landed on his back at the tail end of his own car. His clothes are almost completely blown off and missing. His left arm is blown off of the shoulder. What was left of it would be found over 100 feet away from the initial blast point. The luck of the Irish has officially run out. Ray Ferretto is thrilled that he had killed the Irishman. That excitement isn't really going to last all that long, though. Just as the Nova exploded, he made eye contact with the driver of an oncoming car. Her name's Debbie Spoth, and since we know her name, we know that that's probably not a great thing. Her husband, Greg, was in the passenger seat. As the cars passed, she noticed someone messing with what looked like a remote control car controller in the back seat. Flying pieces of car almost hit them, and Greg told her to get the hell out of there, and she did exactly that. She pulls a hard U-turn and gives chase. Greg's like, go, just like he's egging her on, like trying to get her to catch up because he wanted to get the tags on the car. Ferretto probably thought this crazy broad is like trying to get away from the explosion, so he doesn't really pay attention. He couldn't have known that she was the daughter of a Berea City detective, or that she had a really, really, really good memory, or that she's also a really gifted artist, which is going to work in her favor as well. When she got home, she called her father, Art Volpe, and told him that she had drawn a picture of this guy and wanted to get in contact with the Cleveland PD. So he spoke to Lieutenant Andy Vagno, told him that he had information on the explosion, including a drawing done by a first-hand witness. He told Vagno to keep it quiet so that the local cops could make the bust, not the feds, because this is a time where we still don't want to cooperate, So the next day, Debbie and Greg go down, Lieutenant Vagno, and she brought her drawing, and Vagno brought Ferretto's mugshot. He handed it to her and asked if this was the guy. She handed him back the picture and the sketch and said, "You tell me, Lieutenant." And he agreed that he, in fact, was the guy. And he then pulled photos of all of his known associates. Greg and Debbie both fingered the crab as the man with the remote. Mid-November of 1977, Ferretto would be picked up by the FBI in Pittsburgh and extracted back to Cleveland. There's still a lot more to the story, but at this point, it kind of like turns into a court procedural, and that's really not what I'm all about. I'll end it with a quote from a man that wanted to put him away on something easy. He didn't really want to see him go out the way that he did. He had a lot of respect for him. It's kind of professional courtesy. And that would be somebody by the name of Detective Ed Kovacic. He had this to say, quote, "When Danny Greene got blown up, there was this picture in the newspaper of Danny's severed hand pointing outward with his index finger. And I said to my partner, you know what he's doing? He's pointing at the guys who got him. And he's going to get every one of them." And he did. He got every one of them. Danny Greene was one unique person. He was not a run-of-the-mill hoodlum of the type I'm used to dealing with. He said to me once, "All us Irish go to heaven." I'm not sure if he was right or not, but if I'm lucky enough to pass through the pearly gates, I'd be astounded to run into Danny Greene. More likely he's in a hot place with no cold water and no air conditioning. So that was Danny Greene. That was a big episode. I was kind of debating a couple of times whether or not I wanted to break it into two. I had fun. Danny Greene was a hoot. With that being said, I'm trying to wrap it up because it's been 2 hours. Head over to the Facebook page, go to facebook.com or whatever it is, Facebook, just go to History Goon on Facebook. Everybody's got Facebook. It's not hard. We'll let you on the page. As long as you're like the right kind of weirdo, we're good. You can head over to Patreon, patreon.com/1159media. $5 a month will get you early access to my show. It'll get you early access to Luther's show, Guestnicity. It'll get you early access to both of Chase's shows, Tethers and Almost Fiction. Gets you early access to the Never Daily. It gets you early access to 911 Calls with the Operator. That's so much content. And it's $5 a month. And you get like backdoor access to most of those other shows except mine, because like I'm just reading and you don't really need to see me not be able to read, right? If you want to support me directly, I've got a Ko-Fi. It's a ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. You can make donations there. They'll go directly to me. If you want to do it, it's awesome. If you don't, that's also awesome. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you can. So with that being said, we're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world, just like Danny Greene. Thanks, and have a good